We have started.
The session is being recorded. Just wanted to let everyone know as they have seen the pop out in their screens. Um, I love you too, Dan. Okay, that was a DM. I'm so awkward. Okay, um, let's start the session. We have a lot of cool people in here. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I'm very happy to see all of you. I hope you've all had a good day. And that being said, I'm going to also share that I had a very good day today. I'm recovering from a bad health week, and it really helps to feel healthy. And it's all self care, and that really feels nice to share with all of you. So I'm just going to share right now about what we are going to walk you through the session a little and introduce. Let's start the session. So today's session, as you all have probably seen the brief on various social media spaces from where this came up. It's gender and sexuality and queer rights and LGBTQIA plus rights in law. And we are also understanding how it plays out in workplace scenarios. So this has been initiated by CalPHR and ILA. A little bit about ILA that Madhura would like to share. I think I would like to give it over to Madhura to share about ILA.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Meenakshi. So it has been an absolute privilege and pleasure for us at ILA to have partnered with KelpHR for this session series, which is now happening for more than about 1.5 years. All thanks to the amazing team of Smita and her colleagues. So Indian Lawyers Association is a pan-India organization working to bring together all the legal professionals in the country on one platform. And we are here to create a common voice, and we do this by way of having a lot of local chapters in different cities across the country. These chapters bring in a local flavor in their operations, and they're free to orchestrate their functioning, and they're free to take the job chapter activity forward. So we have chapters in about 70-75 cities currently, and they're all listed on our website. So we'll all reach out to you at the end of the session or maybe tomorrow, and we'll be very glad to have you join us. So I'll give it back to Meenakshi, the moderator today, KelpHR team member. Meenakshi, over to you.
Thank you, Madhura. About KelpHR, I wanted to, so KelpHR is an organization that works in the areas of POSH, EAP, and DEI. POSH is prevention of sexual harassment, DEI is diversity, equity, inclusion, and EAP is employee assistance program. So KelpHR is basically working towards making workplaces more inclusive and creating safe spaces for people at workplaces. So while we are at it, I would like to introduce some concepts of gender, just introducing the genderbread person to you all, who talks about how gender identity plays out and how gender expression plays out, what are biological sexes that are assigned, and then there is sexual orientation, for which we take forward the um, through which we identify as a certain orientation within sexual spectrum. So I am not going to share too much on this because Kanmani is going to introduce us on the aspects of gender. So to start with, I think I would like to introduce people to Kanmani. I have we have a celebrity on board here. Kanmani is a transgender woman and a lawyer from Delhi. She is currently a research associate and a lawyer and a Center for Justice, Law and Society in Jindal Global Law School. I mentioned celebrity because I'm personally a fan of her. I do not know if it is the mainstream, but a lot of people are inspired by her and how informed and knowledgeable that she is, and how she brings herself to any space that she takes herself to. And we have Smita as a panelist with us. Smita is the CEO and co-founder of Kelpechar. She has a total of 23 years of experience in human resources at large organizations. And she has worked with or companies, large organizations like Ambuja Cement, Emphasis, and Hewlett Associates, etc. She is a first-time entrepreneur and pioneer in creating an organization which works in creating safe space and happy and inclusive workspaces. She's an alumni of NMIMS and IIM Bangalore. And also she's great at pulling legs of all of us. Now, something about me. Uh, I am Meenakshi. I also go by the name M. Knox. I am a non-binary lawyer myself, but I also am interested in researching on gender and the intersections of gender law and development. And I did my bachelor's from DSNLU and my master's from Azim Premji University, Bangalore. And I would like to also introduce myself as a very nervous but yet confident person who takes on to spaces and just like uses humor as a defense mechanism for anything and everything. So now I would like to give the floor to Kanmani to introduce us to the concepts of basic concepts of gender and sexuality, because no one can do it better than her right now. Over to you, Kanmani. I've made you awkward enough.
Kanmani, you are on mute. We can't hear you.
I'm so sorry. I just, okay. So first of all, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I am a very, very inexperienced lawyer. I just finished my law school last year from Delhi University, and I've been working at a research center for about a couple of months now, since August 2021. And so please forgive me if I'm saying anything that is not correct. And please feel free to correct me as well. So the first of all, I mean, okay. So I mean, if you go to Yogyakarta principles, if you Google gender, if you Google sexual orientation, you'll get enough international human rights documents which are going to give you definitions related to gender and sexuality. And I'm not going to go deep into that, but make you more understand the concept in a very simpler manner. I mean, because as I was saying just before the session started as well, it is not important personally for me to introduce the most technically legal correct definition, but if I can help you understand the concept, even if it's not perfect, you can go up and look up and understand it better than even I can. So I mean, I've taken this from the UN Free and Equal website. It says gender identity reflects a deeply felt and experienced sense of one's own gender. Now, if we say that it's a label, in that sense, it's how we identify ourselves in that label becomes a gender identity. But how we express may not necessarily correspond with our gender identity, right? It's not just a question. So when you've come to this session, please understand that this is not about some third column, our third gender, or some other person out there who is going to be the only beneficiary from us understanding this. It's all of us who are deeply invested in this, and all of us who are going to benefit from better understanding what exactly is this. Now, okay, so simply, gender identity is who you are. in terms of gender categories, which may be anything. And I'm being very open-ended here, because if you go to other countries of the world and other cultures, there are different ways of understanding gender, like different terms, and the way they understand what is okay and what is not okay for a gender to perform. So then it's important for us to keep it as open-ended as possible, at least here in a session. Sexual orientation is who you're attracted to, simply. Now, I just want to ask this question, very open-ended question. Who decides who you are, right? So when you are born, who decided that this is your gender, right? This can be a triggering question for someone, so please let me know if you feel triggered by this. But the question is supposed to ask you, is meant to provoke you. Who decided that you are a woman or a man or any other gender identity? Who decided? Is it your boyfriend? Is it your girlfriend? Is it your parents? Is it your doctor? Is it your mother? Is it your father? Is it the relative? Is it the doctor? Is it the nurse? Is it the professor? Is it just a document in your 10th standard or in your school that suddenly told you that, oh my God, okay, this is the categories and I have to fit in this. And this is my gender. It's been declared, right? So at birth, the doctor or the nurse or anyone attending to the child sees a particular genital and says this is male or this is female, right? According to what society, or according to what we understand as male or female. But you may be, it's like, I was seeing this video yesterday, so I'm borrowing this. This is not my original idea. It's like I'm sitting in this chair. A trans man was explaining this in some of the video. I'm just borrowing that. I'm sitting in this chair my whole life. I'm comfortable with this chair. That's all right. But I don't feel comfortable in this chair. I want a more easier chair. So I get up, I change my chair. I say, I am not okay with this. Everyone may not be okay. Some people might be okay. Some people may not be okay with it. That's the simplest way you can understand gender. You have been told and you have accepted and you're okay. You're at a certain level okay to say that you are a woman or you are a man. But certain people may not be comfortable. So the sex was assigned to you at birth. Now, what happens when a person, so I said, when the doctor or the nurse or the parent or whoever was attending to the child after the child is born is trying to fit the child based on a certain genital into a certain understanding, right? A label. Now, they may, there are persons who may fit into the category. There are persons who may not necessarily fit into the category. But the problem is I don't know how many of you have read 11th, 12th biology textbooks, at least NCERT textbooks. They have stereotyped and stigmatized intersex persons. And there is always a confusion between intersex persons and transgender persons. I'll start with this very personal thing. So when I opened up in law school, for example, law school mein, and please let me know if you're uncomfortable with Hindi. I'll shift between English and Hindi. So I was told, मुझे पूछा गया था कि आप biologically transgender हो क्या? I was like, what is biologically transgender? What they were essentially meaning was intersex persons. And they somehow understood that all intersex persons are somehow transgender persons. And that's not true. Now, it is not just about genitals. Your variation can be based on chromosomes. It can be based on hormones. So I'll give you an example. Last week, I was taking a session with a couple of government officials. And I asked this, how many of you have undergone hormonal test? And this can be a triggering question, personal medical question. So you don't have to answer, but just think about it. How many of you have undergone a test to test your testosterone or hormonal levels? How many of you have undergone a chromosomal test? So how are you 100%? And trust me, it costs a lot. I went to a psychiatrist at one point, and they influenced me to get a hormonal test done. It was 10,000 rupees in a private establishment. So, and the chromosomal test is far more costlier. So unless every person on the face of this earth has tested themselves, how are you so sure that you don't have an intersex variation? How are you so sure, right? Which is why there are many people who say that it can be, at least with US, this is a very contested statistic, and it can be very much applicable in India. It's as common as, it can be as common as one, the variation can be as common as 1 in 100%. Which means if you have 100 persons here in this session, or say 100 persons in a room, say if the same statistics applies for India, it can be 1 in 100% can be an intersex person. With what I'm trying to say is naturally there is diversity, right? And natural variations doesn't necessarily mean you have to be stigmatized, but that's how society functions, unfortunately. Now, it was also important because intersex person was defined. I put that definition from the Transgender Persons Act, and intersex persons have been placed under transgender persons definition, although that has been contested as well from the community. But it has been, of course, the government hasn't listened much. Now, transgender person's definition. Now, as I said, you sit in a chair, you're sitting in a very cozy, ergonomic chair, and it is 15,000 rupees chair. You're very happy. It's very cushioned. You don't want to move out. You don't want to change your chair, but some people want to. So then, say my gender, just imagine. So my gender doesn't necessarily, I was assigned male at birth, right? When I was born, and for a very long time, a lot of people called me a man, a boy, but I said I'm not okay with it. Now you can go on about हम ये research करते ही जा सकते हैं, why does this happen? But the reverse question will be, why are you so comfortable in your chair, right? What made you so sure of your chair is the best chair in the world, right? It's the same. So it can be asked both ways. Now, Act में सीधा वो definition है. If you look at this definition, just be very clear, just be very careful. It has an individual. It says persons with intersex variations, gender queer. Gender queer is a very the origin is of course Euro-American. It's not necessarily Indian, but the context. There are many people who identify as gender queer in India as well. And then person having such socio-cultural identities as Kinner, Hijra, Arwani, and Jokta. So the socio-cultural identities, there is individualized identity of trans man and trans woman. So I say I'm a trans woman. I'm not part of a Hijra community per se. There is a specific set of rituals. Now, so it's already 7:20. I'm sorry for taking so much time, but I want to the easiest way to explain this is I want to ask you a question and think about it. Kal ko, tomorrow morning you wake up and your parents are not okay with you being at home. They are saying you have not earned and given me 2 lakh rupees. I am sorry to say, we need 2 lakh rupees, please get out. Otherwise society will not respect us. If you were thrown out of your home for whatever reason, who do you go to? Your relatives, your friends, apart from that, maybe your partner. Who else do you go to? Maybe your workplace, right? Your workplace can help, your education institution can help, but beyond all, or maybe religious institutions can help. But beyond all this, who do you have? You don't have anyone. So all of these institutions, friends, family, partner, your workplace, education institution, religious institution, all of them are not okay with you. They're saying, no, we can't tolerate you. Then where do you go? And we are talking in 21st century in 2022. I'm speaking in English and we are speaking in the language of human rights. This is like 100-year-old, 200-year-old language, human rights. Iske pehle, how did people survive? When people were thrown out or people felt uncomfortable living with their parents because they were not accepting or the society was not accepting. people survived in India through these communities in a caste-based society. Let's be very honest. It's in a very caste-based society where even now there is so much endogamous caste. This one, no, that you have to marry within your caste. Otherwise, there will be violence. How did people survive 200, 300, 400 years ago? Through traditional sociocultural communities. So you have traditional sociocultural communities, you have trans persons who are outside the sociocultural communities, which are again very heavily trans feminine, like where are trans men and trans masculine networks and groups. Unfortunately, thanks to patriarchy and caste-based patriarchy, trans men and trans masculine networks have not been allowed to thrive, unfortunately. So I just want to give you all this context because it is important for us to understand it's a very diverse set of identities. It's not just one identity. Now, I'll quickly say these two things. The judgments came in 2014 and 2018, the most landmark, most critical judgments. And it's important for us to remember this, of course, because it might be now it might be very okay, right, for people to hold on to the judgments and say, oh, what is the big deal? But at one point when these judgments came out, transgender persons and queer persons also carried these judgments, especially Nalsa judgment, printed out, did not have any legal knowledge, went to their workplaces and tried to negotiate and got thrown out. This is a very clear reality that has happened with so many transgender persons, where they were thrown out of workplaces because they started openly saying that they're transgender. And of course, even when Nalsa was there and said right to self-determination. And what do you mean by self-determination? ये तो बहुत utopic concept लग रहा है. I'll give you an example. Do you get to choose your parents? I don't think anyone asked your choice before you were born, right? I don't think so. Before you were even like in the womb. So nobody asked your choice. Do you get to choose your relatives? Do you get to choose in Indian society, of course, caste, religion? Do you get to necessarily choose your socioeconomic situation where you're born into? But what do you get to choose? It's who you love. It's your friends, right? And of course, then now the argument is to to be allowed to be your gender to be chosen, which are the highest kind of now fights, no? Who you get to be friends with, who you get to love and marry, and how do you see yourself as? Because you can't break society structures, which is why it is very crucial. Now, now you may think, oh my God, okay, all this, why should we help some community? The Transgender Persons Act has come out and the rules have come out, and despite all the contestation and everything, and like hi, because it's a very bad law, I'm sorry to say, but the rules, of course, mandate that all workplaces should have equal opportunity policies. The other act which mandated this, as far as I remember, is Right of Persons with Disabilities Act. And of course, that act and this one, both the laws have been one of the very less implemented laws in terms of workplaces, including POSH, of course. I mean, POSH came in 2013, if I'm not wrong, and yet many workplaces don't have internal complaints committees, even functional ones. I mean, even if you have it on paper, it isn't functional. Even the university where I studied, I felt like it was not, I mean, it was good, but it is not enough functional in many colleges. Now, it is important for discrimination to be prevented against transgender persons in establishments, and that is an obligation. The Act says very clearly that it is on that establishment, and it includes public and private sector. It's not just government. And it says you have to make infrastructural adjustments as well, which includes unisex washrooms. It mentions explicitly unisex toilets. And it says employment benefits have to be extended, which means leave policies on leave and all other policies that are for employees and workers should be extended to transgender persons. Now I'll end with I mean, this one.
Kanmani Smitaya, on the earlier slide, we get some interesting questions from HR heads that should we first create unisex washrooms and then try and hire people, or should we hire people and then create an infrastructure? So I always get this
Okay,
question.
so I'll actually that you'll get the answer towards the last slide. We just have one slide.
Sure.
No, because that's an interesting slide, which is why I kept it in the last. Okay, so I mean, I've dealt with this question. I still don't have an answer to it. It's a very complicated answer. Should we make all our laws gender neutral? Of course, it's very good if we make it, but in a country like India, which has so much oppression already of women, I'm not saying you should not, but you should be careful, and it should be a consultative process, and you should make sure to understand the nuances before you go ahead and just say we want gender neutral laws. I mean, I've heard this fad of everyone saying gender neutral and people not realizing what it does mean for power dynamics in workplaces. And then and it's not just sexual harassment the way it is understood traditionally in POSH law. It's also about harassment that doesn't necessarily become sexual, or is not understood as sexual. Like creating a very hostile environment in the workplace is sexual harassment, but it's not commonly seen as sexual harassment. And that's the more common thing that happens with trans queer persons, unfortunately. And it may not be the last point I just added before actually starting the session, because I wanted to highlight this. A lot of times people think transgender persons only have gender identity. And I'm sorry to say, all of us have multiple identities. So it is not necessary that transgender persons might be discriminated only on the basis of gender. It might be caste, it might be disability, it can be class. So for example, a person like me who is speaking in English and all this Fado thing may not necessarily get it on my face, the discrimination, but a trans person who doesn't necessarily speak English and who is trying to navigate their way into law may necessarily face discrimination, or they may not be able to access the remedies effectively even if they face discrimination. So this is something that people should understand. Now coming to actually, I'm trying to answer in fact this one with this last slide. I want to ask this question, and this is going to be the answer why you need policies. I'm going to ask straight up, do you have transgender, queer, non-binary colleagues? And I've asked this in so many sessions. I have always gotten back the answer no. And I'm assuming most of you at least will say no, but it's not so simple. Just think about it for a moment, right? And did you have, I'm assuming all of you are not in universities right now, are studying right now and you're working. So then did you have transgender, queer, non-binary classmates in school? Do you think you had any trans classmates in school? So if a majority of the trans community is not in school, or they're dropping out of the school system, how do you think they'll be in your workplace? I'm not saying you need a very school-based education to be in a workplace, of course not. But I'm saying that it does exclude a huge chunk. Now coming to actually Smita's question, answering it in core. So if I'm not wrong, your question was, should we hire trans persons and change our policies, or should we change policies and then hire trans persons? Of course, I would prefer to have the first, hire trans persons, because we need money. I'm being very crude and honest here. Trans persons need money to survive. And there are battles that it's not like we are some exclusive community who has the only battles in the world. Everyone else also has battles. It's just our battles do not necessarily get support systems just get through that part of life, the battles. So then, of course, hire us, but it's not so simple. That is why I asked this question. Do you think you have trans colleagues? Because there might be trans person going with the assumption that there are already transgender persons in your workforce, in your workplace, that they may not be comfortable coming out, right? Is also a good assumption to go for. Because I have heard of at least with universities, and this is of course now public. So there was an RTI, report that came out on NLUs, National Law Universities. There are about 20 to 21 national law universities, and some of the national law schools actually responded in the report that this was done by a couple of students from NLU Delhi, and it was said that we don't have transgender students, which is why we don't have policies. And I'm like, if you have 500 students, how are you so sure? Are you in their life? I have like, I'm sorry if I'm being sarcastic here. I'm not that very polished person, but I'm like, how are you so sure that you have been in, like, parents spend so much time with their children, and yet it is a struggle for parents to know their children completely. And children spend so much time with their parents, and it's a struggle for children to know their parents completely. How are school and college administrations and workplaces so confident that their employees or their colleagues, our workers, are not trans, are not queer, are not gay or bi, right? And it's also a journey, right? People undertake journeys. What is to make so sure that a person who is working in your workplace currently comes out 10 years later that they are gay, and they become very powerful? You have just lost a very good employee or a worker who could have done so much for your workplace. So who could have shown, who could have been brilliant, only because there was no policy in your workplace. I mean, it doesn't necessarily, everything is about intention. It's not just about policy, but that's my answer. Sorry, a very complicated answer.
No, thank you so much for that.
That's my presentation. I'll end there. I just want to leave the question here. Let people just soak it in and think about it. Because I could have just gone to partners as well, but that would be too intimate to ask and too traumatic for people to think about. So at least this, you think about the fact that why are there no trans colleagues? So even, for example, trans people who are getting recruited right now, many of them get recruited in like, for example, in a university, there are teaching and non-teaching staff. And I don't want to sound classist here, but I'm telling you, like, trans persons are not hired in positions of power. Very, very few trans persons make it. And that's also dictated a lot by the class caste privilege and so many other things. Yeah, I'll end there.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Like I said, it was amazing. I was anticipating an amazing understanding of gender from you. Now I want to take the session to a direction where we discuss, since it came up, that we talked about gender neutral policies and we talked about POSH. So a very basic and very important, very nuanced question that we should start with, I feel, is whether we should have gender neutral POSH policies, and why should we have it? Over to you. Also, that being said, I also wanted to add a note on that. People from NLUs, I am a person from NLU. I am non-binary. I never made it to that list, and it was so insightful to hear that come out, that and a lot of my batchmates and other batch people came out to, they were out but still invisible. The kind of invisibility that exists around queerness is that even if you're yelling at the top of your voice that I am non-binary or I am queer, people just still see you like a straight cishet person only, because that's what they want to see. And hiring visibly trans people or visibly queer people in not so conspicuous positions is also such an insight for workplaces, because we talk about diversity, but is there visibility in that diversity is also a very nice question to think about. So over to you on the question on POSH being gender neutral. I would like Smita also to answer this and Kanmani also to answer this in their own ways.
Okay, so it's why do we need POSH policies in workplaces to be gender neutral? Well, for the very simple reason that often, if you don't, I mean, there are, I still remember this conversation that once happened about trans queer persons. I mean, many people were part of the meeting, so I have only limited consent to reveal. So trans queer persons met cis feminists for one of the first times at a kind of a regional or national level some years ago, and I was like very limited way part of it. And one of the very senior lawyers who I immensely respect was actually presenting. It's from her presentation I'm borrowing here. She said, if you, there are multiple ways, right? You can say, you can make the victim gender neutral. You can make the both the complaint, I mean, both the abuse, I just want to use abuser, but I mean, I understand technically it's complainant and the other person. So abuser and the victim can be made gender neutral. You can make the, you can keep just the victim gender neutral. What you can also do is you can be very bureaucratic and very technically legal, and you can say the victim is now woman and transgender person. But what will necessarily happen is, as I said, this is something that I wanted to add in the slides, but my today was very heavy, so I couldn't add. But trans people also undergo journey, right? Trans people and queer people undergo journeys. So for people to arrive at a point where they necessarily reflect on the documents that they are trans, and then for the policy to apply to them is a very difficult, and it takes time. So that, so people will always fall through the gap, right? Of the limitations of certain, of every identity box is limiting, no? Please understand that. If so, I'll give you an example. I'll just go back to, oh, okay, 1 second. I'll just go back to the definition of transgender person. Just look at it carefully. It says at the end, Kinnar Hijra Aravani Jokta. And there are so many people who in the communities who may not be comfortable for this very simple reason that they may not understand what is transgender, or they may not necessarily want to identify with that English word, right? It's, we are talking about self-determination. So there are many people who will be not okay with saying they are transgender. So are you going to leave out the them being sexually harassed from, I mean, them getting any remedy for that from the policy just because you want to be like hyper technical, is what I'm trying to say here, right? It's a question of whether you want to protect all your employees from sexual harassment, or, and understand that sexual harassment is about power dynamics and power relations and about entitlement, and not necessary, and about hierarchy, which you can't of course abolish. Not just about gender, but it is also gendered, but I'm just saying that it's you can't avoid that. So what will happen necessarily is, I'll give you an example. It's easier to understand through example. So I, as a transgender person, I don't have T on my document, right? I'll give my personal example. My document doesn't say T, it doesn't say F, and by T I mean transgender person, by F I mean female. It says M. And I apply to a law firm, and the policy of course says, now we cover women and transgender persons, and it doesn't talk about self-identification or anything. It goes into the law and says, okay, fine, we are only up to where the law says. Then what happens is I get sexually harassed. I'm looking like this, I get sexually harassed in the interview itself. I'm not even an employee. Say I'm asked, what was your past occupation? And I am to tell them that I've had to do sex work to survive. I'm just giving a hypothetical example. And I'm asked sexual favor. How will I complain? Because I have been sexually harassed in reality, and in this hypothetical situation, I'm being sexually harassed. How will I complain? Because identity and the law is saying you're not a transgender person until you get there. But I want justice, right? I want to feel that workplace is welcoming for me. And it's easier to say transgender persons should be mainstreamed, but and should get mainstream opportunities. But this is one way to at least ensure that you have safe workplaces. And sorry for taking your time. I'll just say one more thing, just one last thing. and I don't have a concern, but I'll say this. So my dean told me that before I joined a year back, there were 3 transgender persons who applied to Delhi University to study law. At least on document, it was T. And they didn't join because they were not comfortable with that they might face sexual harassment in the campus, and there is no policy. If you go to Delhi University, you'll see a lot of people doing distance learning courses and not doing full-time courses. There might be many more reasons, but one of the main reasons is because there's no policy. So are we going to keep people out just by keeping our policies very gendered? Is my
Thanks to Kanmani for that. Just adding to what Kanmani mentioned, and she gave a very, very deeper understanding of all this. But from corporate level, I just wanted to add that when the law came by, I was personally very upset because it did not cover other genders. Okay, it said only women. And I actually approached Professor Asha Bajpai. She was dean in TIS, Tata Institute of Social Studies. She has been my professor, and she was on the panel who had supported government when they were coming up with this law. So I approached her. I said, why wouldn't you include other gender? Why wouldn't you include men, just to start with, right? So her simple response was, Smita, women statistically get maximum sexually harassed. Okay, be thankful that you got the law, first of all, to start with. While we pushed other gender, we pushed them to be added, but they said that it will get very, very complicated. Now, yesterday I was discussing this question with another lawyer, and we were talking about all kinds of exclusion, like marital rape case is a big question mark, and marital rape law is a question mark. Men not being included in POSH is a big question mark. So that lawyer had his own perspective, said it will get very, very complicated. Imagine the number of frivolous cases coming up, and he had his own thought process, and there's a deep conversation, and today we don't have time for that. Maybe next time we'll take that forward. But clearly the law said only women. Okay, when the 2019 Transgender Act came up, it also does not cover all transgenders. It says trans women. Okay, I think it does not say trans men or somebody who's not self-determined, self-identified as a trans woman is not, as the example Kanmani gave very brilliantly, right? But it does not stop any organization to extend their policies to all genders and create a workplace. Can we be sensitive at workplaces? We have HR departments, we have employers who genuinely, truly want to make this workplace safer. So can this be extended is a good thought that all organizations, all employers, all HR heads who are in the organization should be thinking. And I think to Kanmani's point, that start creating policies and people will start coming in, joining in, they will start showing up. Okay, right now they are not even showing up, they are still in the closets, not coming out. And the percentage she gave, right? 1 out of 100. Imagine how many employees you have in the organization and they're still behind closet. They're stuck there because they are not comfortable. So I think that is the most important part that we should be looking at. So POSH currently is definitely women only, but does not stop any organization to extend it.
Thank you so much for both your insightful answers. And I would like to move to the next question, which is how do you think that workplace harassment extends to people from the LGBTQIA plus community? And how do you think gender identity or sexual orientation together and separately play a role in this kind of a scenario? And if I'm just adding to the question, if you want to elaborate with the case laws, if something that the NALSA guidelines have added, and it's something that the NAS case has, NAS Foundation case has brought into like, can we derive something from the case laws or what the judiciary has said uh, to the question that we are thinking about?
Okay, there are okay, so there's several questions in the chat box as well. I'm just like looking at the time and I'm like, okay, that this is a lot to discuss. Okay, so first of all, workplace I mean, we need to understand that as I already said, it's a journey. So then, and it doesn't necessarily have to have a destination. So then gender-based harassment and sexual orientation-based harassment isn't necessarily like very clear-cut boundaries you can draw, which is why your policy cannot necessarily just talk about trans persons, denying the fact that trans persons, I mean, forget everyone else. Even if you just want to think about trans persons also have a sexual orientation, right? And what if a trans person faces harassment based on sexual orientation? That is not going to be covered, but just their gender, like if I'm going to make fun of a transgender person based on their gender, okay, fine, the policy will cover that. But if I'm going to make fun of the fact that the transgender person is a bisexual person as well, then the policy won't cover it. That's a very ridiculous way, right? I mean, and as Smita ma'am has already pointed out, just because the law has a certain limitation doesn't mean companies cannot take active action. Now, I'll give you an example. This is, of course, part of a public case, and it was taken up by the Lawyers Collective and Anand Grover. So then I can talk about it. A person faced harassment in Delhi University, and of course, from what I know, was the college principal refused to help or support, and then it was a pain for they had to take up legal help, and I explained to the police for about 3-4 hours, and the police said there is no penal provision. There is no IPC provision which can cover the harassment faced by you. I'm sorry to say. And then they had to approach the Delhi High Court with legal help to file an FIR. The Delhi High Court had to creatively interpret Section 354A to say that one section says, I think if I'm not wrong, 354A, subsection 2, if I'm not wrong, or 3, says, I mean, harassment faced by a woman. It says the victim is a woman. The other 3 provisions don't mention the victim, but they mention the person of perpetrator can be a man. It says a man doing this to a woman, and then the other 3 doesn't say anything. So then that can apply. Why don't you register an FIR? The Delhi High Court said, and then they finally did it. So this is the kind of gymnastics that you have to do, and no offense to gymnastics, to get a complaint registered for a transgender person facing sexual harassment. And any lawyer here, or even a lay person, will tell you that FIR is just the first stage of a criminal proceeding. It is not like the person has been convicted or a criminal trial has happened to determine whether the criminal offense has taken place or not, or the person is guilty or not. So this is the kind of gymnastics. So then companies will have to make policies to ensure that at least will not tolerate such behavior, is what I'm saying. I'll give you an example. So I was organizing after the 2018 judgment, ironically, we were organizing a Pride session. As much as I'm not very a fan of Pride, but we were like, okay, we'll organize a Pride session, and we called queer trans people, activists, lawyers in a panel. And right outside that panel in 2018, right outside the Delhi, the building, law faculty building, there were a couple of guys who were standing and said, "Aajkal aise log bhi aane lage hain kya?" And then I was standing there, right behind me, 5 dudes were like shouting loudly, and then saying ki, ऐसे रंडियों को तो लॉ नहीं करना चाहिए, तो जाके भीख मांगना चाहिए. They said this, and I had to approach the Delhi University Internal Complaints Committee, and of course the Delhi University Internal Complaints Committee head, the president, very clearly said, no, I mean, as the UGC guidelines make it clear that in terms of universities, students can complain for bullying and sexual harassment based on sexual orientation and gender identity. But the moment the student steps out of a university and goes into a workplace, then what? I mean, on paper, at least there is some protection for university students. But then I get placed into an organization, then what? Right? Which is why, and what they said wasn't necessarily just transphobic. It was based on a very caste class slur of me being sexually available and sex worker. So, and many a times it can be just that the assumption that I am gay, right? I'm not gay, but then the assumption that I'm gay, and the assumption can be a basis for harassment. It's not necessarily understood as sexual harassment in the traditional sense, but it is harassment, and it is creating a hostile work environment, which is a problem. But unfortunately, policies don't cover it. And there can be other ways of sexual harassment as well. I'll give you an example. So workplace. So for example, when trans persons try to get jobs in, and these are part of presidents, when transgender persons try to get jobs in, say, police or in other places in government jobs, they were told to undergo medical examination. And medical why should I open my clothes and show it to a doctor and confirm to the doctor that I am looking like a particular way, and conforming to say if I don't have a vagina, then what? And why should I strip in the first place, right? It's my autonomy, it's my personal body autonomy. But unfortunately, that's sexual harassment that the workplace is forcing a trans person to do, or a queer person to do, or an intersex person to do, just to get employment in the workplace. So yeah, that's sexual harassment, but that's how it works, unfortunately. And then the court had to say, no, you cannot mandate medical examination based on the Nalsa judgment. This was pre-act case, before the act came in. And then the person got a job in the police. So yeah.
So just adding to what Kanmani just said, and a lot of organizations do not have grievance redressal committees in the organization, which is parallel to internal committee for POSH. Okay, there is something mentioned in Industrial Dispute Act, but unfortunately, a lot of organizations do not follow it because it is not as stringent as IC or 2013 guidelines for sexual harassment is. So our organizations looking at it, I get questions like, we are not an industry, so we should not have grievance redressal committee. But who in the Industrial Dispute Act, it is very, very clearly called out that establishments should also have a grievance redressal committee and should be looking at cases which is beyond sexual harassment. As an organization, are we doing that? Are we having a proper disciplinary or grievance redressal committee, and these are looking at the cases which do not fall in sexual harassment cases? So this is something that I would really want whoever is listening to, the HR heads, the policy makers of the organization, to constitute a grievance redressal committee. That will be an input from my side.
Okay. I would also like to know if, okay, how do you think that one should navigate these kind of situations at a workplace? Maybe we can think in leadership level, or how does one navigate harassment with respect to POSH at workplace in a queer perspective, or in a sense that you want to create that inclusion? How do we create that kind of inclusion? What is it that will help, maybe?
I mean, first of all, more workshops. That would be a very good starter, because unfortunately 1 hour or 2 hours, as before the session, Smita ma'am was also saying, even 2 hours is not enough, and that's true, because what we are discussing is on a very surface level. Unless you directly in physical talk to people for hours and understand, like, that is why the question, right? You didn't have trans class. Like, how do you understand? Many of you, even if you've gone to single boys schools and girls schools, later in college and in workplace and in family, everywhere else, you're intermingling, say boys and girls are intermingling. At some point, you're understanding at least some basic experiences. With trans persons, many trans persons and queer persons, many people have not talked. That barrier has not been broken. So the first step is workplace sensitization. There is no other way. Because I'll give you an example. So when I joined law school, even though there were professors on gender, it took them a while, and I had to write a letter with 19 points saying these are the points based on which I am seeing a work hostile study environment in the university. And after that, and after holding multiple workshops where then people were understanding that, okay, fine, now we understand the kind of harassment that you might go through. Like, I'll give you an example. That's why I put up this slide. You might think that not having washrooms is not a big deal. What is a big deal, right? Or you might think, okay, yes, it's a very basic need. Yes, you need to go to washrooms. So for me, I'm right now at my home, and my parents are not around. My parents, my dad will be coming tomorrow, but otherwise I can't even wear this. I'm 26 years old. I can't wear this at home. So I carry my saris in a bag outside home, and I've gone to my university for 1.5 years like that. I've gone to my master's degree before that like that. And after that, now I'm working for about several months like that. And which means that I don't drink water when I leave home. I preferably don't eat breakfast. I try and avoid public washrooms. And because I faced harassment in male and female washrooms. Like, you might think, what is a big deal, right? Like, so male washrooms. So when some of you are from Delhi, my sari pins were opening. I had to go to the Delhi. I thought, okay, fine, I'll get down at the Kashmiri Gate metro station. I went to the Shulabh Shauchalay, and I wanted to go into the female washroom. My hair was short, of course, back then. So my hair was not grown out. So people could make out that I was a trans person even more. I was not very passing back then. And so the persons there, the women were uncomfortable. And I understand, okay, you're uncomfortable. I was wearing a sari, of course, but that doesn't matter. So then I went in, and the women came out of the washroom. They were not comfortable with me using the washroom. So then I said, okay, fine, that's okay. I'll use the male washroom. I used the male washroom. Half of the men came out. Half of the men turned their genitals from the urinals. I'm sorry, this is a very triggering conversation, but you will have to understand that with trans persons, this is a big problem. And then I was like, what? I mean, I just wanted to adjust my sari and use the washroom and go out and just go and ironically, I was going to an exhibition where I was being displayed among many other people. Our life stories were being displayed there. And I was going not alone, but with 2 friends. And for 1.5 hours, almost, I was outside the washroom, trying to go into the male or female washroom. Nobody was allowing me. And my friends were trying to deal with a huge crowd of more than 20-30 people, shouting and screaming that, "Ye log yahan pe kyun aa rahe hain?" I was using a metro washroom. And I was a Delhi University student. I'm just trying to say that I'm the respectable trans person here. And yet it doesn't matter. So imagine the kind of non-respectable trans persons, what they face if they try to start working.
Kanmani, you would want to share about phobias, transphobia, homophobia, how that can be dealt with. And I can then speak about being an ally, because I think Meenakshi's question was that in organizations, how do we maneuver the whole harassment piece? So if we can share with the team what is phobias all about, and then.
Sorry for deviating, but transphobia is basically, very simply put, a deep-seated ignorance, to say, and hate of and dislike of trans people. And what do I mean by that? Transphobia can be internalized. So you might be misgendering me. So for example, my pronouns are she, her. You might be misgendering me and you might be calling me a man, a dude, using he pronouns for me. Very simple way I'm saying. Of course, it's more deeper than that. And it can lead to any amount of violence transphobia it is a very real thing. Just as there is patriarchy in this world, and transphobia is equally a big structural problem in this world. And homophobia also exists, where you are not tolerant towards queer persons and homosexual persons and bisexual persons, and you have deep biphobia and homophobia in you. And it it can be as simple as not being okay with just gay people in your workplace, to being very hateful and saying that these people should not be in our workplaces. It can be any of that. And that deep seated homophobia, transphobia is like, it is very difficult to deal with. You can do many sensitization sessions, but people who are hateful. But then you can try and break the barrier, age old barriers. So Smita, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So
But before you, sorry, I wanted to add.
I just wanted
Okay,
to
go
add
ahead.
what Kanwani was saying. So the example that you gave about the Delhi metro station was exactly an outcome of phobias, right? So that example, I just wanted you to define it for people to understand that people who are, you mentioned in the beginning saying that why awareness is important, because people have to. And I will tell you myself a story that we were brought up in an environment which was so protected that we were never exposed to a trans person or a homosexual. So I have grown up being phobic, homophobic, transphobic, you can say that, and I'm ready to accept it. But I have made a journey from being a transphobic, homophobic to an ally. It took me many years. It took me, I can say, nearly up to 14-15 years, but I have made that journey, right? So sorry, Meenakshi, I just wanted to add to that. So it's perfectly fine. And I have known people like Kanmani, many of them who are very tolerant with people who really want to make that change, right? And they know that it's not easy for even for us, right? They know that and they are there to hold your hand, right? So Meenakshi, I'm so sorry, I just wanted to make a point.
No. It was very important. And none of you, please apologize. Please stop apologizing for taking up space and talking. It's what we need right now. And I also wanted to add the othering aspect of it, the us versus them homophobia that we see a lot in workplaces. Like, they are doing like this, or the transgenders are coming to us, like this kind of us versus them also comes in when we see any other kind of discrimination. Like, for example, all these women these days are coming and taking jobs. Now that sounds redundant in the current 2022 of feminism that we have come to. And similar journey has been made to accommodate trans people. So when we are talking about trans lives and trans people, we still use these transgenders instead of saying they identify as a trans person. So in workplaces, this is often the case that transphobia that comes across in workplaces it could be very micro. It is also coming from the space of unaware, ignorant, or lack of exposure is the best word to say, that there is no exposure to trans people, because people are not out, we don't have safe spaces to work at. So this lack of exposure also creates an othering, and this othering creates either hypervisibility of trans people when they are visible in a space, or an invisibility of them. So just wanted to add that workplace also has this kind of transphobia and this kind of homophobia, where people are like in casual, like how there is casual sexism, there is also casual homophobia, where people will be like, hey, don't swing the other side. I have had a boss tell me that in my own workplaces, or saying things like, okay, you look very gay today. And that coming from a person who is not from the community is not a compliment. So it is also like, these kind of things. Or what is, if you're looking like a certain way. I had shorter hair, I had a buzz cut, So if I go like that to a place, they'll be like, "Ah, today you're a boy." So say the sense with which we say it, maybe it can be very euphoric or dysphoric in how we are putting it across. Sometimes in your workplace, you can say things like, "You look amazing today. You have pulled off the whatever you want to pull off, like, you know, the boy look or the girl look or whatever. Like, you look great, girl." Or it could be like, "Oh my God, you look like a girl. What's up with you?" You know, so these micro aggressing transphobia and homophobia, I wanted to bring that also into consideration when we are talking about transphobia or homophobia or not knowing about pronouns, they, thems. So that's all, I think. Over to you, Smita, if you have something to add to that.
Yeah, so very important when we spoke about phobia, I thought it is important for us to speak about ally, being an ally to communities. So who's an ally? Ally is somebody, now if you're talking about LGBTQ community, ally is somebody who's not from that community. It's a cisgender person. It's a person who identifies as a particular gender and has a sexual heterosexuality. Okay, so it could be a man or a woman who's identifying as a heterosexual, standing for this community, LGBTQ community, standing with them or standing behind them, and constantly advocating the cause. Can we turn from being a phobic person to an ally, or somewhere if somebody is in between, to being an ally? It is a great journey, and everybody in the across this gender should be standing up for this. If not everybody, at least a good percentage of people. And I think that inclusion will come automatically. You don't have to really work hard for inclusion. Okay, so this is what I wanted to end my conversation with. I don't know if Meenakshi has anything more planned. We are also doing part 2 of it, where we are going to touch upon the softer aspects. I think we have ran out of time. Okay, I'll hand over the baton to Meenakshi if she has anything more.
I don't have much to add for now, because I think we have all gotten a lot of ideas of a lot of things from this session. I want everyone to sit with these thoughts, and I'm really sorry if someone got triggered by any of the words or any of the incidents that were narrated. If it resonated with you or if it triggered you in some way, I'm really sorry about it. And I wish to leave this space with an understanding of uh, that of a common goal, that we are all trying to achieve: inclusive workspaces, inclusive spaces. And how do we radically include all kinds of people into our spaces and not have a certain caricature of something in our mind when we are thinking about someone, you know? So I think that is all. I want to leave us all with the thought of inclusion and some kind of happiness that we all get through meeting and being able to express and talk. I feel wonderful having so many people in the session. And I'm really, really grateful for everyone who's present here. And I'm really grateful for all the trans elders and the current trans and queer people who have created this space for all of us to come together and talk. I want to just keep it at that, and also invite you all to please come for a part 2 of the session, where we will touch upon more aspects and softer aspects of the journey that we have started together. And hopefully see you all again soon. I won't take more of your time. Thank you so much for coming here. And thank you, Smita and Kanmani, for your wonderful, inclusive, and amazing ideas that you brought forward today. Um, I'm very excited for session 2 right now. Yeah,
Actually, I
that's
just
all.
wanted to say, Kanmani, I mean, today's session, every time I go through LGBTQ definitions, every time I go through these definitions, there's something that pops up in my mind. And I realize that, it's just so little we every time know. Okay, we have to know more. And listening to people like you, Meenakshi, who have been researching in this space is so enlightening. Thank you so much for sharing so many thought processes.
Thank you, Smita, for creating this space also. Okay. I think we'll take your leave now. Thank you so much.